want to turn to something that we've been talking about really throughout the whole week here. This time we want to turn our attention to a very important issue here in Utah facing every community within our state.
We're, mothers and brothers and sisters and friends of people that have gone through this, and we come together and support each other.
Tonight, with your help, we hope to break the silence on suicide.
Talking is the key, and there's hope.
We've gathered state leaders.
And it has been kind of a taboo subject. It is heart-wrenching.
Experts and families to open the dialogue.
The belief is that if we start talking about it, it's going to give kids ideas. As a parent, if I talk to my son Dave, he's going to go out and kill himself. Where the reality is, they've already thought about it.
Suicide is a difficult topic because so many stigmas surround the issue. But we've heard from so many of you who have lost children, family members, and friends to suicide, asking what more can be done to prevent these deaths. And the first step is to talk about it.
Tonight, we'll show you step by step how to have that important discussion with your child. We'll look at Utah's stunning suicide rate and discuss why it's so high. And most importantly, we'll show you where you can go to get help. We also have a story of hope and recovery. And throughout the program, you'll notice a phone number at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to call it right now if you're seeking some help.
Too many families affected by suicide are left to grieve in silence. News specialist Jeff Lysick reports from Roosevelt, a community mourning the recent death of a high school student.
Yeah, in their professional lives, Marcy and Travis Tucker are trained to spot people who are in need and get them help. He's a lieutenant with the Duchesne County Sheriff's Office. She works as a victim advocate for the county and is also on the Suicide Prevention Board for the Uinta Basin. That's part of what makes their story so tragic. It's also especially difficult because I've known them for almost a decade now. Their kids go to school with my kids, and as a parent, I can't help but put myself in their shoes.
She was fun-loving, outgoing, giving, supportive of others, loved her family and her friends.
Courtney Mae Jensen appeared to have the life many teens dream about. Beautiful and compassionate, drill team captain and student body secretary.
And proud to be who she was.
Accepted to 5 colleges and offered tryouts for 4 dance teams. But maybe headed to the Marine Corps after graduation instead.
Yeah, wherever she went, she was just like the centerpiece of wherever it was.
She was a ball of energy. She was the energy of our family and of our house. And so
on March 26th, that 18-year-old ball of energy ordered her dress for Union High School's prom and talked excitedly with her mom about their upcoming trip to Zion National Park to hike to Angel's Landing. She also argued briefly with her mom, who caught her in a lie.
So I took her phone. I'm like, come back after your class and come talk to me. And, she went to lunch. Oh, I never saw her again.
The next day, Courtney's body was found in a Uinta County park. Her death ruled as suicide.
Immediately, your life will never be the same.
The Tuckers knew Courtney was experiencing anxiety and stress about life after high school. They had her talk with a family friend who owns a therapy business.
I thought we were okay.
A few of Courtney's friends, however, knew otherwise.
But I have found out afterwards that she did talk to 3 friends and disclosed serious thoughts of hurting herself, I guess.
Tucker doesn't blame her daughter's friends for keeping quiet. As a teen, she probably would have done the same thing. But she said it's time for that to change.
It's not tattling. It's being a true friend. It's helping someone when they can't help themselves. Courtney could not help herself, or this would not have happened.
The Tuckers were worried that talking about their daughter's death might lead to copycat incidents.
If you have a feeling things aren't right.
They are more afraid, though, of what could happen if they choose to remain silent.
What scares me is if it happens to Courtney, it could happen to anybody.
We need to have a more grassroots approach to helping other people in our communities so that other families won't have these tragedies.
Now, the Tuckers told me that they've had age-appropriate conversations with all their kids about topics like sex and drug use. They said they even developed code words the kids could use in case they didn't feel like they could ask for help directly. They said they never dreamed they needed to include suicide in those talks until now.
Such a tough story, Jeff. Our hearts go out to all of them. How's the rest of the community reacting to all this?
Well, Courtney was well known and loved not only here in Roosevelt, but also in the neighboring communities of Altamont and Duchesne. That means her death really sent a ripple effect through this area. I've talked to a lot of parents since Courtney died who've told me that they've begun to talk with their kids about what they need to do or what they should do if they feel like they're going to hurt themselves or hear that a friend might want to hurt themselves. The Tuckers say that's exactly the conversation they want parents to have.
Jeff Lysick reporting from Roosevelt. No doubt a problem affecting every community in our state. Mike joins us with a closer look at Utah's high suicide rate.
Yeah, Dave, clearly this is a heavy issue, and I want to talk numbers for a moment here to maybe put some things into perspective for you. Take a look at this. Utah ranks in the top 10 for suicide in a region here in the western part of the state known as the Suicide Belt. But an even more alarming statistic is what you see right here. Take a look at that. We're ranked 5th in the country for youth suicides. And here's why. Last year, we lost 23 children between the ages of 10 and 17. And this year alone, we've already lost 18 kids. That in itself is an extremely disturbing number for the state official who has to investigate all of these deaths.
In so many cases, it's sort of the pointlessness of it that is most depressing.
State medical examiner Dr. Todd Gray deals with the end result of a suicide almost every day. And the numbers in Utah continue to rise, almost doubling in the past 7 years. How alarming is that to you?
It's just sad. The numbers are just grindingly ongoing.
Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 17, and these numbers concern state officials all over the state of Utah, especially Governor Gary Herbert.
Well, all of us should be very concerned. It's way too high. I don't know that we understand exactly why, but we need to find out why it's high and do what we can to lower it and stop it altogether. I find so difficult about these cases is that it feels like every family is going through this all on their own.
I can't believe that he was capable of taking his life.
Emily Horner's family continues to heal years after her brother's death by suicide.
I think the most important thing for me personally was just learning about it, learning about the warning signs, being able to help other people.
She now co-chairs the Utah chapter for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
You just have to not give up. Don't give up. Through talking, we will find help.
And while many people hear about suicide, you probably hear less about suicide attempts. So we sat down with an emergency room doc about what he sees day in, day out. Here's Dr. Michael Jones in his own words.
We see almost every day at least one young person between the ages of 12 and 30 that has attempted suicide in some way. Taking medicines or harming themselves either because they think they want to kill themselves or they're calling out for help in this ER, and we're not a big emergency department. There's no way that any family is immune from this, and I think that people would be shocked at the number of these cases that we see from every level of socioeconomic background, from homes where the child has been provided with a lot of love, a lot of support. So there is something that's not happening to prevent this, and I think it's probably awareness. We absolutely can help people have hope. There are tons of resources, and American Fork Hospital has poured a lot of resources into caring for these types of patients. We have 24 hours a day a social worker here that can reach out into the community and gather the resources that these patients and families need. There is a community that needs to rise up, and we have that community here. I think in America we've had a hard time coming to grips with mental illness as a disease and as a thing that can affect anybody. So I don't think it's something we need to be afraid of, but I think we need to be aware of it. We need to be willing to talk about it. We need to be willing to help these kids know that they can live very productive, normal lives even if they're dealing with mental illness.
That was Dr. Michael Jones. We're going to discuss how to talk with your kids in just a few minutes. But joining us first are two of the state's leading experts on suicide. Doug Thomas, he's with the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and Anna Fondario, an injury epidemiologist with the Health Department. Thank you for both being here. We showed some numbers earlier that really raised some questions, and I want to ask primarily, why does Utah have such a high rate? That graphic would suggest geography might play a role.
It does. It plays a role. The ruralness of Utah and the surrounding states is one of the risk factors. We think that it's because there's lack of access to care. Also, the Intermountain states all are at high elevation.
Altitude.
Altitude.
This is interesting, and that's being researched right now.
It is. Dr. Perry Renshaw at the University of Utah is one of the premier researchers in this area, and they know there's a link, a correlation. They're not sure what it is. The breaking point is about 2,000 feet above sea level. Communities that are at that level or above are at much higher risk for suicide. Along with those risk factors, Utah has a higher population of Caucasians and Native Americans compared to other parts of the country, along with the Intermountain states.
So that would suggest genetics.
Right.
And that's also being researched.
It is being researched as well. So those are the risk factors that aren't very modifiable. However, one of the modifiable risk factors is access to lethal means. And so making sure your medications are locked up or your guns are locked up and put away, because most of the time it's an impulsive decision. And so if you reduce that access, you can eliminate it in some cases.
Now, I've got to ask, I've been looking at the Facebook comments and the interaction all day long, and one of the most common responses is that demographics or religious aspect plays a role, and you would argue the contrary.
Spirituality and religion is actually a protective factor when we look at all of the studies that have been done. So it's not a factor that increases the number of suicides.
Anna, that also, those numbers showed that Utah leads the country almost in youth suicides. Given our young population, that's got to concern you.
You know, it does. You know, for over a decade, we've been higher in our suicide rates nationally. And so it was mentioned earlier that we're 5th for youth suicides. And that is very concerning. From 2007 to 2010, our youth suicide rate increased 110%. So
how are you addressing this on a statewide level?
Well, we're collecting the data. There's a Suicide Prevention Coalition that Doug and I are involved in. You can talk a little bit more about that.
So the State Suicide Prevention Coalition is a group of officials at all levels of government, first responders. We have folks from Sandy City and Salt Lake City police departments, psychiatrists, family members, survivors, all on this committee that work together and have put together a new plan on suicide prevention, how to address it. And one of the main areas is to reduce stigma around getting treatment and help for mental illness or mental health concerns. So
one of the things we hope to raise and address here tonight. So I guess the most important question, and we're going to ask this a lot tonight, what is it going to take to reduce these suicide levels in our state?
It's going to take a strategic approach from all levels, from the community, individuals, family members, all of the professionals that are in the field, first responders, speaking the same language, getting out there, helping people understand there is hope, and that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and we need to get that message out there.
All right. Anna Fondario, Doug Thomas, we appreciate your insights. One thing that you mentioned also is that intervention is key to preventing suicide, and Dave's going to tell us about a grassroots effort that's working.
That's right, Deanie, and as we know, it's going to take a united effort to combat against suicide. A big resource in the fight is Hope for Utah. The program started in Provo, but is now available throughout the state.
We know we make a difference in Provo because of our teachers. They're the eyes and the ears.
Dr. Greg Hudnall has spent hundreds of hours speaking to thousands of people all over the state about suicide prevention. His reasons are personal.
I was a high school principal, and I got a call from the Provo Police Department that there was a student with no identification who had taken his life in the park next to my school.
Hudnall had to identify the body and afterwards vowed to do everything he could to prevent another death by suicide.
Over the next 4 or 5 months, I reached out to invited 40 different providers.
And then he organized the HOPE Task Force. It brought together community leaders, mental health experts, and also included a comprehensive peer mentoring program.
Not just like helping people like avoid suicide, but it's just helping people like avoid depression.
The impact is remarkable. The Provo School District used to average 1 to 2 suicides a year, but is now going on its 8th year without one.
I think that's why we have such a model program here, is because we have that prevention piece, but we also have that partnership piece, and communication is a big part of that.
Hudno used the Provo model to create the Hope for Utah website.
Suicide and bullying, talking to youth about suicide.
The site offers training opportunities and outlines what to do when a student is in crisis. Hope for Utah recently finished a teacher's guide to suicide prevention.
When you know that some of them are struggling, it hurts you like it would hurt you if your kids are struggling.
Last year, the Utah legislature passed a bill requiring public school teachers to receive 2 hours of training every 5 years on how to recognize signs of suicidal behavior in young people.
Knowing some of the things to look for and see and be able to do something maybe positive is kind of a neat feeling that you might be able to if you just took the time.
The ability to talk with our kids about suicide is vital. Now for the next few minutes, let's go step by step through that important conversation with Dr. Hudno, a man who can help us know what to listen for. I have a 13-year-old son. How do I start this conversation about suicide?
I like to sit down and in a very private moment, so it's not in front of the other kids, it's not in a moment when I'm upset or they're upset, but it's that moment when you can sit down in a private time and ask them how they're doing. And sometimes it's that question of, you know, Dave, I'm concerned. I've noticed you've started to change a little bit. You're not hanging out with your friends anymore. You're not wanting to go to school. Son, can you help me understand maybe what's going on? I'll be honest, I worry about you.
As our conversation goes on, let's say I see some red flags. Well, then what do I do? Because I don't have the answers, and I'm not an expert, and now I'm face to face with my son who's revealing some things. What do I do?
Too many times as parents, we want to fix everything. But what we need to do is ask those tough questions. Have you thought about hurting yourself? Have you thought about suicide? And then to step back and to allow them to talk.
How do I not completely overreact and try to change it all? And if I don't know what to do, who do I call?
The most important thing is if you have any kind of questions or any kind of concerns with your child, get help. Ask a professional.
In a state like Utah where religion is so predominant, is that a strength or is that part of the problem?
They publish 50 states and see how everyone fits in. State of Utah is in the top 10. Invariably, we've been in the top 10 for years. And so people always ask me, well, is it because of our religion? Because the top 10 usually are the western states. And what really happens is religion is a resiliency. And those kids that belong to a religion, regardless of the religion, but that they belong to it and practice it and are part of it, that actually provides strength and help for them. The challenge, especially in our system, when you look at the high percentage of one religion, is when you fall out of the norm. We're not very forgiving. In a lot of situations, kids really get not accepted, they get picked on, and I think it's what you said earlier, we don't know how to respond. We don't know, do we go put our arm around that child or do we supposed to stay away?
What's the relationship between sexual orientation and a struggle with that, especially in Utah?
Sometimes kids can be very cruel and really mean-spirited and go after those students. And I personally have been involved with a couple of those suicides of young junior high kids, acted different, dressed different, behaved different, and were not accepted at all. And because of that, they were really picked on by their peers, and that group really struggles.
What do you hope our viewers get from a night like this?
So I hope, more than anything, out of this segment, that parents will gain the courage to have that discussion, just to be reassured and just to let the kids know that they care about them and that they're checking in.
Some very good counsel in there. Dr. Hudno says parents like us really need to pay attention to kids after a crisis like a breakup with a girlfriend or a bad test score, because a lot of suicides happen within a 2 to 3 hour window.
Dave, that's great information, and I talked to some students who agree with those very things. Students themselves play an invaluable role in stopping suicides and getting kids help. I visited with members of the Hope Squad from the Provo and Nebo school districts to get a better idea of what they're seeing and hearing, and it might surprise parents. As members of the Hope Squad, how many of you have encountered classmates that were suicidal?
It was one of my friends. He came to me actually during class, and he said, you know, I've been having these thoughts and I've written notes and saying goodbye and things, and it really hit close to home with me because he was such a close friend of mine.
We're almost like gatemen. We open the gate to get them to a better place, to help them find counselors and people who know how to actually deal and address the problem. Because these are problems bigger than we can handle.
Where it'd be, I guess, almost awkward or uncomfortable for kids to go straight to counselors.
Your role in the Hope Squad is to help prevent students from even going down the road of suicide.
As Hope Squad members, if we recognize those hints, that we go to an adult immediately.
Sometimes with our problems, we hold it like a marble to our eye. It just seems like it's a really big deal, but if you hold it out, it's not as big compared to other things.
What do you think would surprise parents about the feelings students have and the issues they face?
I definitely think there's a lot of stress from school, but also from social issues like drama with friends.
Or depression or anxiety is something that's really big that parents don't know about their own kids.
I would think parents would be surprised that their kids wouldn't come up to them and say something.
I know my parents are surprised by like little things happen in my life, and they're good things and I haven't told them, and so I know like the bad things sometimes feel too big to tell your parents.
What advice would you have for parents?
You know, talk with your kids, and sometimes it doesn't seem that easy because a lot of times kids feel like they don't want to tell or they can. It's a big secret.
Checking their text messages or looking on Facebook to make sure that everything's going all right, because I think like parents don't even recognize it.
Making sure that they're really comfortable just talking about anything, because if you can talk about little things, it's a lot easier to be able to approach them and talk about the big things.
Very insightful. Let's move now from the Hope Squad to a story of hope. We don't often hear from those who've attempted to take their life, because it's just not something we talk about.
Right, but there are many who struggle with the stigmas and the shame that comes with suicide. Mike has the story of a young man offering hope and insight.
Yeah, Deanie, his name is Seth Adam Smith, and he recently shared the story of his attempted suicide on a blog read by thousands of people all over the world.
I just felt very isolated, very alone, like I was the only one feeling this way.
Seth Adam Smith knows exactly what it is like to climb out of the deep, dark hole of depression.
Recovering from a suicide attempt, it's not an event. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen.
Seth first showed signs of depression in high school, but was not diagnosed until it got so bad he had to come home early from his LDS mission.
Not only was I dealing with depression, but I was coming home a year early in a culture that, you know, it's not necessarily the faith that does it. It's the culture sometimes. There's a stigma associated with people that come home a year early.
Seth's parents sought treatment for him, but they did not realize he was in a downward spiral.
But there were some things now that I look back on it. For example, he was withdrawing, spending more time in his bedroom.
In September 2006, at the age of 20, Seth tried to end his life.
But I remember still feeling like, oh, I don't want to come back to this. You know, I don't want to come back to all this pain I've caused.
It just takes the air out of you.
His suicide attempt was especially heartbreaking for his mother.
Women do like to feel guilty, and so you start putting that guilt on yourself. What didn't I do right?
While Seth was in the hospital, his family rallied, and it was an experience with an older brother that became the turning point for his recovery.
And I laid down on the bed, and he came around to the side, and he laid down next to me, and I said, you know, Sean, you don't have to stay here. I really didn't want to be around anybody. And he said, Seth, I almost lost my little brother. I'm not going anywhere for a while.
It wasn't about me, how I felt. It was how he was feeling, and what could we do to help him.
Nothing to be ashamed of. It's like cancer or diabetes. It's an illness, it's a disease, but there are solutions out there.
Seth left Utah for college to get a new start. He also began working with at-risk teens.
And I used medication to help me get over depression. Even after the suicide attempt, But the best healing and the best medication came from helping others who were dealing with the same thing.
Now married, Seth is editor-in-chief of ForwardWalking.com. It's a website dedicated to helping people move forward in life.
If I really am serious about healing, about helping other people, then that demands that I share my story.
A great story of hope, and let's continue with that theme. We welcome Dr. Jeremy Cottle, CEO for the Provo Canyon Behavioral Hospital, and Dr. Debbie Brindley, a licensed psychiatrist, also with that Provo facility. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
What do you think so far?
Great stories, important topics. We are so excited that KSL has taken this topic on. This is something that's been needed for a long time.
As we watch Seth's story of success, which is really what business you guys are in.
And that's what the gold standard is. We want success, and it's doable.
Let's make the triangle here: concerned parent with some issues, therapist, and then one who's going to treat with medicine. What kind of issue do I bring you first?
If you suspect your child is depressed, anxious to the point that they're talking about hurting themselves or even dropping hints, or they've changed so much, some of the factors that Dr. Hudnall talked about, where they're backing off with their friends, they're not doing as well in school, then bring them in early to a therapist. And what we do is we assess where they're at, and then what we do is build a safety plan. Make sure they're safe.
So you're like the Marines, so to speak, first wave, and then if it's serious enough, you'll recommend over to you, and then what role do you take?
Often I'll take and kind of build on that. So I'll start with what we have, the information, and then maybe kind of tease it out a little bit more, trying to decide, is it more depression or anxiety or other things that medications can be helpful with. And it gets a joint decision. So it's medications is only part of a bigger piece.
How have you seen therapy work?
So oftentimes we'll have a parent who's concerned, bring their child in, and they're concerned that they've broken up with a significant other, and they're worried that they might not be safe. And by getting them through that crisis, talking about the stressors, helping the parents, building a safety plan that if they do feel like they need help, that they can go to a coach or their parent. And if that takes care of it in therapy, then they're done with that safety plan. But if it's something more, then it would go to the physician.
And you've talked a little bit about almost treating a mental health type situation as you would a fever, so to speak, that it can be controlled and it's not the end of the line.
Correct. I look at suicide as a symptom, because there's lots of different reasons why people get to that point where they want to end their lives. Again, medication comes in along with therapy, and together they have the best outcome. Often I like to emphasize and explain several things. One, that medication is really a support or help, kind of like maybe a cast on an individual who's broken an arm. It's not something that necessarily has to be permanent, but it's something that we look at, we evaluate, and the goal is always to use that cast while we're working on therapeutic issues, and then hopefully we don't need to use the medicines permanently.
Last question, Dr. Cottle. Why don't parents like me bring my kids to you?
Oftentimes they don't know the resources that are out there, or they're hesitant, they think it's a minor issue, and oftentimes they're just too close to it.
And you just like them to just take that extra step.
It's better to be safe than sorry, and I think the bottom line is there is hope. Mental illness can be treated, and suicide is preventable.
Dr. Cottle, Dr. Brindley, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Deanie, Mike?
Here are some additional numbers. We've just talked about the importance of parents getting help if you need it, so these are numbers of places you can call for help. We have also listed mental health resources for every county in the state on our website.
Now, we know we have not been able to cover every issue related to this very complex topic, so we have provided much more information online at ksl.com, so check it out there.
We want to thank our special guests tonight, including the families that have shared their private stories, and we hope you found this program helpful, and will continue the conversation in your homes and communities. And the three of us will see you back here tomorrow night at 10 o'clock.
Breaking the silence on suicide. Brought to you without commercial interruption by Provo Canyon Behavioral Hospital.